I work with a lot of eldest daughters or firstborn daughters who are often struggling with themes of perfectionism, control, um, just feeling like a huge load on them to really make things work for the people around them that they love. And I really love the work that I do at Restorative Space. But I was noticing a pattern. I noticed a pattern of a lot of women coming into my practice where their presenting issue was, I'm single. I'm still single. Or I've never been in a healthy relationship, or I just got out of a breakup, or I just got out of a divorce. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what's going on. I feel lost. And they really feel like there's something wrong with the fact that they are single women. And, I think as someone who has experienced those things, has really felt very much that there was something wrong with me for being a single woman of a certain age. I really identified with their stories and knew deep down as a clinician that being single was not something to be diagnosed, and really all this messaging that single women are getting about why it's not okay to live your life and that your life is essentially on hold until you have this partner. And so women just wait and they internalize all of those things and think that they are the problem. And from my experience and going through my own singlehood era and my own breakups and my own pain, I realized you don't need therapy, right? And I don't need to be diagnosing you to teach you some of the better ways that you can love yourself and really live your best life. And so I've created Her Soul Supply as a platform where I was able to do things that I felt really limited by in my private practice, because it being a medical model, I have to diagnose it.
Yeah. I got something to say. I've been through some things, a whole lot of things. I guess they thought I wouldn't make it. I guess they thought I would fall on my face and just stay there. But baby, that's just not who I am. Oh.
All right. Welcome back to the From Grief to Purpose podcast. You all listen. Today's episode, joining me today is Fanny Tristan, a licensed trauma therapist, women's empowerment coach, and founder of Her Soul Supply, a wellness program dedicated to helping single women of color reclaim their worth, deepen their self-trust, and build lives anchored in purpose, not just partnership. Not just partnership, I say again, okay? With over 15 years of experience in the mental health space, Fanny brings a powerful perspective on what it means to heal, grow, and redefine identity outside of society's expectations, especially when it comes to relationships. And what are we talking this month, you guys? All month long, we are conversating on relationships. So today we're going to have a conversation centered around healing, identity, and embracing worthiness. Okay. This one here is for my women of color, us. Okay. So if you've ever felt the pressure to arrive at a certain point in life, to feel whole even, this one is for you, sis. So be sure to tag a friend and tune in and take notes. All right. So first of all, let's go ahead and welcome my guest, Fanny. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me on today. I'm excited about this conversation. Number one, because, we're discussing all angles for this month on relationships. And I felt that this one was a very important topic to address. Again, we're talking to, women of color. We, face different things in life outside of, our everyday living and just, going to work and things like that. So I want to know, though, before we even get started to go too deep into a conversation about that per se, what inspired you to create Her Soul Supply and focus on single women of color?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, as you mentioned before, Nina, my background is in mental health. I've been a psychotherapist for many years, a clinical social worker for 15 plus years at this point. And I've always worked with women. I've always worked with women in their families. And primarily for a while, I was running my private practice called Restorative Space. And at Restorative Space, I do a lot of work that focuses on trauma. I work with a lot of eldest daughters or firstborn daughters who are often struggling with themes of perfectionism, control, just feeling like a huge load on them to really make things work for the people around them that they love. And, I really love the work that I do at Restorative Space, but I was noticing a pattern. I noticed a pattern of a lot of women coming into my practice where their presenting issue was, I'm single. I'm still single. Or I've never been in a healthy relationship, or I just got out of a breakup, or I just got out of a divorce. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what's going on. I feel lost. And they really feel like there's something wrong with the fact that they are single women. I think as someone who has experienced those things, has really felt very much that there was something wrong with me for being a single woman of a certain age. I really identified with their stories and knew deep down as a clinician that being single was not something to be diagnosed. That in order to be diagnosing them as, that being the issue, that I would just continue on a legacy that's actually been very harmful to women of color, a legacy that's really been ingrained in patriarchy and white supremacy, right? And all of these systems in which women over history challenge the status quo. They challenge the lot that they've been given, and then they are pathologized as being hysterical, as being the problem, as being crazy. At one point, they called us witches, and this can go so far back. And I felt like some of the rhetoric I was really hearing in social media, in person, just out in the world about the single woman, right? The single woman in her 30s, in her 40s, even in her 50s, and thinking that there's something wrong with her, that her standards are too high, that her clock is ticking. I don't know what she's thinking. She's being irresponsible, that she needs to settle down. What is she doing? Really all this messaging that single women are getting about why it's not okay to live your life and that your life is essentially on hold until you have this partner. And so women just wait and they internalize all of those things and think that they are the problem. And from my experience and going through my own singlehood era and my own breakups and my own pain, I realized you don't need therapy, right? And I don't need to be diagnosing you to teach you some of the better ways that you can love yourself and really live your best life. And so I've created Her Soul Supply as a platform where I was able to do things that I felt really limited by in my private practice, because it being a medical model, I have to diagnose you. I have to give you a treatment aligning with your diagnosis, like how you would expect at your doctor's office, right? And I knew that single women needed something else. They needed each other. They needed community. They needed to travel, which I think is one of the most valuable healing properties that I've used in my own life. And so wanting to have retreats, have in-person gatherings, but also educate them on a lot of the things that I've known, not just as a therapist, but as a social worker who knows that we've all lived in systems. We've all grown up in certain systems that we've had to navigate or sometimes survive, and that they're a big part of the way that we see ourselves in the world. And so a lot of the educational material that I have in Her Soul Supply is helping women really kind of decolonize their singlehood mindset, really create a path for themselves that really doesn't center pleasing a partner, but is more about how do I help you become your authentic self so that you attract the kind of people that are your people, right? Regardless. And if that does mean wanting partnership or wanting marriage in the future, which are all beautiful things, that you make sure that that's done with intention and not because your clock is ticking, not because you're done with the judgment, not just because you want a ring on your finger, but the idea that whoever comes into your life is going to be someone that is going to love you for you and that is going to be a part of a beautiful growing garden. that has a strong foundation, right? That's what makes it worth it to do all of those things that we want so badly, right? I think the world forces women to focus on the wrong things, right? That you have to do things at a certain time in a very specific order, and no attention is paid to personal development and actually knowing yourself outside of these systems, outside of men, right? And that being the kind of untapped information and resource within yourself that helps you actually find the partnership that's right for you.
Wow. So yeah, you're saying a whole lot and said a whole lot, like for real, to pay attention to. And of course, Fanny, you've already mentioned it, but from this perspective, right? She's not sharing on the empowerment of being single in a negative way, like be single, stay single. You don't need no man. That's not what's being said in context here. But the focus, like you said, on being a single woman and being a negative perspective on how you play it in your mindset. Where does that come from, right? Like, how do we, if you are single, like I'm a single woman, but how are you showing up for yourself on a day to day basis? And have you set a standard of, I need to be married, your clock is ticking, I need to have kids, or I'm not, worthy because I don't have these things in place. What is that doing to you from a mental health perspective, even a spiritual perspective, is just some of the things that I hear. And then coming from, the context of society, like how have we allowed that to have a say so in how we, show up in our own place of being a woman and how we should show up, in our own lives, because we all have, different directions that we're going. And do you have to do it like this, set way? And again, you mentioned like something wrong. If you desire to be married, I desire to be married again one day, but I'm doing it a certain type of way, but there's not a pressure, and I'm gonna say any longer because I've been down that lane too, where I felt like, well, I gotta, but what clock was I on? Like, whose clock was I on? So I'm wondering, like, what do you think then? What do you believe, since you do this work with women? What do you believe, or why do you believe, I should say, worthiness and identity are so deeply tied to a woman's healing in this perspective? Because I'm thinking too, like, this would also probably, once you I believe in, first of all, let me say this. I believe in doing the work, and this is just from life lessons learned. Before you jump into a so-called marriage, you need to be at a whole point yourself. Your identity should not be found in my husband, you know what I'm saying? And you've now attached your identity to this man. And so often I see women after doing that, and then women have been divorced after a divorce, or even been so long in marriage, now they don't know who they are because you didn't take the time to navigate yourself in your singleness. So why do you believe worthiness and identity may be deeply tied to the healing journey of a woman during her single season?
Yeah, I love this question. I was just speaking with a client recently about how she realizes that she was a chameleon, not only in romantic relationships, but most relationships in her family and her friendships, that she was always someone that molded to other people. And it really got me thinking about how, from a society standpoint, from a community standpoint, women are kind of primed to be chameleons, right? Because women are raised in standards that are often embedded in patriarchy, right? We live in a country that really prioritizes whiteness, right, as a standard. And so I think that women grow up within these systems and learn how to navigate them in a way to understand how to get their needs met, right? How they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to speak to people, how you're not supposed to be combative or confrontational, what it means to not be intimidating, and what happens to you if you are intimidating or confronting or have a difference in opinion about certain things, right? I think that we get a lot of messaging about how we're supposed to be. And a lot of those things about how we're supposed to be come from this idea of making someone else comfortable. They're not rooted in women's empowerment. I think that there's been some nudging, right, in better direction, in the sense that we now encourage women to go get their education. We encourage women to be financially aware, right? Because we are part of a generation of women where we don't have to get married in order to experience a certain level of freedom, right? A lot of us live independently. A lot of us have our own bank accounts, right? This isn't our mother's era or our mother's mother's era, right? Where marriage meant something very different, right? We can expect different, we can expect more. And so I think that we're also, because we are kind of one of the first to really have that privilege, right? Really a right. I wouldn't even call it a privilege. I'd call it a right, that we are kind of in this uncharted territory where we are getting the pushback from the tradition, from the patriarchy. What do you mean you don't see this person as your forever partner? Why are you dating them? Right? Or just people really not understanding why this very clear cut path that was made for you, this relationship escalator, as I like to call it, right? Why aren't you on it? Or why are you trying to get off of it? This is a good man. Why would you leave this man? Meanwhile, you're lonely, you're suffering. There are other parts of your identity that you want your partner to fulfill that they refuse to or don't want to work on. And you're supposed to just be okay with it because you're on this escalator and you don't want to get off, right? And so when women come to me and they feel that they've either kind of are leaving that kind of relationship where they feel like everything was really geared towards what their partner wanted, or even being single and going about their singlehood journey in a very deferential way of, okay, how do I make myself be chosen, right? I think that you are kind of suffering in this mindset of, how do I make myself fit in this box? And there's no time really spent on, if I actually had no expectations, what would I want? If I actually didn't have to think about sexual pleasure as pleasing my partner, how do I enjoy pleasure? What would I would like to do with a partner, right? Not just what my husband wants to do, right? A lot of women don't even know that part of themselves, right? Because they think about that part of their identity only being in partnership. When in reality, no, you're a human being. It's a whole part of you and part of what makes a happy sex life in marriage or outside of marriage is how well you know yourself and what your needs are and how you communicate that to your sexual partner, right? And so thinking about not even just your sexual identity, but all of the things that make up the different parts of you, right? All of your identities. And do you know all of those versions of you? Because whoever you bring into your life, whether it's a new friend, a new partner with work, or even a romantic partner being kind of one of the most influential, right? They're going to be meeting these different identities. And they're either going to want to embrace them or learn from them, and grow with them, or they're going to be like, I don't like that. I don't like her. She's going away. We don't talk to her. Right. And so what happens to her? She disappears. Right. I talk a lot about this with moms. You know, a lot of mothers feel this way. A lot of first time mothers feel this way because of how strong the motherhood identity is of like, well, now you had a child. So who you were before this child, she doesn't exist. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't have interests. Her only interests are her children. And oftentimes mothers feel lonely, right? Because they're not necessarily encouraged or don't feel like they have the permission to have that girls' night, connect with their friends, right? Be able to do things sometimes that aren't centering their children or the wellness of their family, but understanding that being able to maintain all of these parts of your identity make you a good mom, make you a good partner. I think one of the biggest lessons that I had coming out of the pandemic with my husband, you know, we've been together. We've been in a relationship for about 10 years. Actually, no, 15 years. We met in 2010, but we have been living together for many years, and we had our daughter right before the pandemic began, and it was just a new era for our relationship, and that we ultimately ended up having to do in isolation. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons about our relationship, but I think one of the biggest lessons we learned or that he learned was she's nicer to me when she hangs out with her friend. Like when I get to connect with my girls, when I get to fill my other cups, I come home and I'm so much more loving. I'm so much more appreciative. I get excited to play with my daughter. I get excited to play with my husband, right? Because it's something that I remember that I chose. And that's something that I feel is this kind of life of servitude that sometimes you can feel when that cup is just constantly being taken from.
Yeah. Wow. Listen, one of the things I have to say, because it's definitely, pushed in all facets of, many different community settings, to include, the church setting. But it's always well, women, when your husband comes, that whole, dynamic and perspective, and it's a prompting to, and if you pay attention to it too much and get engulfed to it too much, you do have this race of like, oh, I'm waiting, and you're on this do for that particular lane, like, but I feel like often too, you can get caught up in that particular area. And like you said, and then, okay, that's comes, but we rush into these relationships sometimes, just to go back a little bit, without, healing from our trauma, unpacking all of that, because we're on this lane of, I need to get married. I got to find a husband. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then often, we find ourselves in these relationships, just to move forward a little bit, like you said, and you just missed out on this whole life that you were supposed to have for yourself. And, from a spiritual perspective, I am, made it known, of course, like I love the Lord and all those wonderful, beautiful things, but I also believe in there's a pursuit that you should put first, not only for your own life, but, a focus in, God, because God has all made us uniquely. We have our own identities. We have our own things that we should be doing in this earth. Like, what are you supposed to be doing? Like, what do you love to do? What are you called to do? What career do you want to have, so that you don't lose yourself, like you said, and you get caught up in not being able to fill your own cup anymore? Like, I don't know, I'm just taking care of kids, or I'm just taking care of my husband. Okay, well, what about you? So how do you, with women that have found themselves in these places and spaces, or just, they're still single and they're still in this mindset, they're in this belief, system of what they think it should look like, how they think it should be. I should be at this place by now and I'm not here, or I'm not married yet, I don't have kids yet. How would you help a woman, or how do you normally help women start to shift their belief, from partnership equals wholeness? Because you still have a lot of women that believe, well, if I don't have a partner, I'm not, whole. How do you work with them in that perspective?
Yeah. So I think something that I definitely take from my clinical background is you start with education. That's why I have workshops. That's why I have free guides on combating loneliness, building trust, and things like that. Because, first of all, you have to be able to see that it's possible, right? But you also have to understand the why, right? Not all of us are like being Mary Jane with like our little post-its on our mirror with all our affirmations, and we're like, I believe all the things, right?
Right.
Sometimes you need the evidence to believe the affirmation, right? And so I like to provide the evidence, right? There are more and more studies coming out that are actually showing that single women are actually happier than married women,
Mm,
right? There is a huge increase in women who are older in their 50s getting divorces, right? I think they call it like a gray divorce, right? Where people are just like with a partner forever. And
mm,
then towards the years where you expect, oh, well, this is what it's all for, right? So you can grow old together with someone. It's like, I'm not doing this for another 20 years. Women are just cutting the cord, right? There's research behind that. There's a reason for that, right? And so I like to go into the reasons and really explain to women, hey, you might have this belief that this is what this is, but it's not. So let me tell you how the grass isn't always greener and the things that actually make the grass green, right? Let me teach you about how patriarchy shows up in our day-to-day lives, right? How beauty standards affect how we function, how we walk into a room, how we look at ourselves, and how that later impacts our relationships. In my big program that I have, I teach about communication skills. I teach about how to identify healthy, unhealthy relationships, how to understand what your attachment style is, and all of these kinds of tools that help you learn more about yourself, right? So that when you go out in the world, you're coming from a perspective of you, not the perspective of, oh, I hope this person likes me,
mm.
right? You learn about power dynamics, how power actually works in interpersonal relationships. right? And so I really start with educating women on understanding the why it is, or why you think the problem is what you think the problem is, and
Yeah.
what the real problem is.
Yeah.
And let's talk about how that shows up for you every day. Because we're not here to just talk about your childhood, right? We're here to talk about how you feel when you leave your house, how you feel about how you treat yourself, what you say to yourself, right? And how there's evidence of that coming up in your life and
Yeah.
helping you make those connections.
Because a lot of that, what you're saying too, I think of how we self-sabotage sometimes. And, we get into these moments of negating ourselves a lot. And like you said, showing up within this societal way that we think we're supposed to, do and be and become and all these things. And we don't stop and just have moments of quietness to just figure out who you are and know that that is okay to take some time for yourself, discover who you are and walk in your own uniqueness. And so with just the thought of like self-sabotage, what would you say though for women that are doing that? How do we stop doing that? Like how do we stop self-sabotage and just embrace, like our singleness? Like if you can give us like a small step or something for someone that's listening right now and can identify like, whoa, that's me. Like what am I doing? If they can't join a class right now, if they can't get to you right now, like what are some small steps that you can give them to say, okay, here you go. Step one, do this.
Yeah. Step one. Okay. So I think that a step one can be learn as much as you can about why things are the way they are, right? I think that a good resource could be some of the guides that I share online. I do a lot of that, but also doing your best to educate yourself on a podcast. Listen to women who you admire, right? That talk about their sense of freedom, right? I think a really popular public figure right now that is talking a lot about this stuff is Tracy Ellis Ross.
Was thinking of her. I was just thinking of her. Yeah, she came to my mind. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. She's been doing such a wonderful job at being the example of the kind of woman that is unapologetically herself
Yeah.
and honest about what it all means, right? She talks about the grief of, grieving a life that you had expected for yourself, grieving not having your own biological children, what it meant to choose yourself when unhealthy things were happening around you. And she travels and she clearly, acts. She's a very well decorated actor and she's just out here trying to live her best life. And I think that even watching figures like her and how she moves and the things that she talks about, I think can be the inspiration that we need sometimes to start doing it for ourselves. Because sometimes we live in environments where, well, you might live in a very traditional place where it's like, well, no one does that. And everybody I know is married with kids by, 25. And so I am in the wrong, and it's very hard to see outside of that. But then I think with the power of the internet and social media, we get to explore more expansively beyond our communities to see, oh, wow, other people are living in this way that I never could have imagined. And that is so interesting to me,
Yeah.
right? I think we really underestimate the power of the role model, right? I feel like role models were big. I grew up in the 90s. I feel like it was all about like everybody has to have a role model. Okay, this is going to save these kids from the streets, right? It's going to combat drugs. Kids need role models, right? And then everybody wanted to be a basketball player, and and everyone wanted to be Jordan, and all of those things. And I feel like, of course, celebrity is still huge in that way, but I think that being able to find that in more of those personal spaces, right? Like what you're listening to, what you're watching, and then being able to find those communities because they are out there, even if they are maybe in a city closer to you. These communities are happening because we live in a time where things are very polarizing,
Yeah.
right? And even though we've come out of this pandemic, I think people are more and more isolated than ever. And I think there's been a lot of intention in trying to curate environments that make people feel um, and make people feel like what they're going through is normal because it is. Being lonely in your single era is real, right? Feeling disconnected from people, feeling unhappy with your body, feeling like there's something wrong with you and not wanting to go out or even experiencing social anxiety about putting yourself out there, that stuff
Yeah.
is real. So you need to be around people that are talking about so that you can normalize that.
Yeah.
And that's why community is such a big part of my work, is that y'all need to see each other because, yeah, it's not a given that you're going to see it in your day-to-day life.
And that's so true. Like, first of all, community is extremely important. I'm a big believer in putting yourself in environments that you like, not that someone told you to join this group because it sounds good, it's popular, whatever. Is that your lane though? Is that what you like to do? You feel drawn to it. Like, don't just sign up for something just to be signing up or join something just to join. And you're going to be there like, why am I here? Why did I come to this thing? It's not connecting with you, sis. So just, find your lane, as they say, find your village. But I am a big believer in that, again, like you shared, being single and even though, you're married now, but you've gone through this experience. I'm single. I've been married before, but yes, you just still get all of the feelings like, am I going to get married again one day? Absolutely. That's the desire, right? But do I experience those moments of loneliness or pressures of how my body should look? Is it to the standard, first of all, that I like to have it? Okay. Because I'm, I do like to work out. I try to eat healthy. I eat when I want it, my junk when I want it. But then there's all these things that sometimes it's just like crowd your thought process while on top of the fact that you're single, and then don't let the other stuff come in like, you know what, I should be married by this point, or I'm not having this at this point. So those thoughts do come. So how would you say for one of mine, and I want to wrap it up here at this, like for a person that is encompassing all that, not only just community, but do you also do work or do you push the education piece towards the emotional and spiritual healing as well? And what would that look like outside of a romantic type of relationship in a woman's singleness? What should she be doing? I like to say, how should she be posturing herself in every way, but what should she be doing?
Um, she really needs to be getting in touch with her personal values. And if you don't know what your personal values are in terms of how people should be treated, about the world and how it works in terms of why we're here on this planet, right? I think you really need to be grounded in knowing the way in which you see the world.
Yeah.
Also being open to the idea of being pleasantly surprised, right? Because we don't know everything,
Yeah.
right? But I think a big part of, I know for me, my spiritual practice is my connection with ancestry, my connection with planet Earth, right? I remember, and this is a silly story about me, but my favorite place in DC is the National Portrait Gallery.
Okay.
And, they have like all the famous portraits, every presidential portrait, there. And they actually have the first image of Earth, which was the image that was taken by the astronauts that went out. And it was, I don't remember the time period, but I think it was like the 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
where we got to see Earth. And I cry every time. Every single time I see Earth, because I can only imagine what it must have been like to like only see maps and then one day being like, that's us. That's what we look like, and that's who we are in the grand scheme of things. And we don't even know the
Mm,
rest,
mm,
right? And that humbles me so much
mm.
and reminds me of how I am one of many and I am part of a woven fabric that is so strong, right? And that goes into all of the things that I do. It goes into how I parent, how I grow in my romantic partnership, the friendships that I nurture,
Yeah.
the offerings that I have, right? And just how I move through the world, right? I see myself as one of many, and one of a community, right? Essential to that fabric.
Yeah.
I want women to tap into what is that for you? Is it the same? Is it different? Right? And there is no right and wrong, right? But there's truth. There's like what is true for you and what is important for you, because that moral compass, she doesn't move that much,
Mm,
right? And when you make value-based decisions, right? If you're in the habit of doing that in your everyday life, not that much is going to shake you. Not that much confusion comes your way,
yeah.
right? Because you're not being led by somebody else. You're not just people pleasing,
Mm,
right? you're open, you're considering, you're learning, and we should always be forever learning and deciding what to adopt and not to adopt.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this is what it means to be grounded in yourself and being able to know exactly what your values are.
Yeah. Wow. Listen. Whew, again, you said a lot. But I'm so grateful for it. And definitely ladies, because when I hear you speaking, it's a whole world out here, while we're worried about, if you're worried about your single season, and that's such a big, a loud noise in your head right now of the why am I single? Let's, flip the narrative. Like, okay, you're single. It's not the end of the world, right? There's so much life, like you said, education you find in Earth, period, this planet that we live on, those things that are encompassed within the world, like what else is taking place. Educate yourself, like Fanny said, on, culture, your culture, your community, like where are you needed and things like that. And again, just to touch back on the context of the conversation, just from what I pulled away from it. And I hope you all are pulling something away from the conversation as well. But even before you enter any romantic relationship, and also as you're working on your friendships, because I believe that as well, there's a perspective found in just even how we show up there too, and family relationships. Like, this is also a great time, I feel, and I don't know how you feel, Fanny, like just to address like past wounds that sometimes we ignore, recognize those unhealthy patterns, because you don't want to start recognizing them when you're in the relationship where it's so many of them. You're like, okay. And then you just find yourself ending the relationship. And it could have been something you could have been working on while you were single. And address those insecurities is what I'm pulling away from our conversation today. Get counseling, get mentorship, do the inner healing work to prepare yourself for all types of healthy relationships. If you desire to be married one day, to include that in marriage. But the most important relationship that you need to work on is the one with yourself. That's a big one. So I always like to have my guests say some parting words or words of encouragement out there to our audience. And I know today that we're talking to women of color specifically. And, listen, if you're not a woman of color and you see this podcast and something touches you, receive it. But I know this one specifically is because Miss Fanny works with her specific program is for women of color. But I just want you to say something, leave something if you have something to share to encourage that woman out there that has felt this episode to her core. Like, you touched on something, just if you could leave something for.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to say that you need to remember that the world is always, always bigger than you think it is. And when you think that you are in this waiting period, or you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling bored, realize that if we were really, really doing the work, if we were really taking care of ourselves and really doing the personal development stuff and standing on business and handling our finances and doing all the things, we wouldn't have that much time to be thinking about dating, right? If we were really functioning on all four cylinders when it came to relationships, right? You're as healthy as you want to be, right? You are taking care of all of the things. You have all the relationships that you need in your friendships, right? Your family relationships are the way that you want them to be. Your life would feel incredibly robust, right? And so get to work.
Get to work. Listen, get busy, y'all. Ladies, get busy and stop chasing these men. Okay. But thank you so much. And like you said, that is a very true statement. And again, not pushing, not finding yourself like, don't not get married, be single and stay single for the rest of your life. No, we're talking about work, y'all. You need to do your parts, get healthy, heal properly, live your life, have fun, and make friends, join communities that are healthy, and empower your own community. Get out there, do some volunteer work or something. But thank you so much, you guys. Listen, I also want you to share, Fanny, before you get off. Her website is www.hersoulsupply.com. But where else can you just share where they can find you, and all of her information as well, you guys, is going to be left in the description. But if you could just leave us, where can we find you, like on social media and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I'm probably most active on Instagram. So you can find me at Her Soul Supply on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I also have a pretty active newsletter where I share a lot of tidbits around my framework. And so you can go to my website and sign up for the newsletter as well and get some freebie guides as well.
Oh, I love that. And also too, because it's just popped into my head, and so I try not to ignore those things that when I think of them, because it's always meant for somebody. I feel it's okay, because we are talking today to a licensed mental health worker, and I know sometimes there's a stigma around getting help, even as women. I know men face it, strong. We face it as well, but it's okay to go and talk to someone, to talk to a therapist, to get that type of help that you need. Take the stigma off, right? It's about investing in yourself. So make that investment. Reach out to Fanny, for example. If this episode touched you, if you can relate to it, again, her website is www.hersoulsupply.com, because we're rooting for you for sure. We want you to be the best versions of yourself in single season and out of your single seasons. Just be the best version of you. That's our episode, friends. Listen, again, all month long, all August, we're talking about relationships of all types of, different dynamics. So, and this one today, it definitely was about doing the work that you need to do as your individual self, you single woman of color, do that work. Be sure to join us on the next episode. But other than that, you guys, we're out of here. All right, you guys.